As a species, we suck at prediction. Each one of us carries an evolutionary burden of biases, false intuitions, and flawed assumptions. And in many ways, these neural glitches have shaped our society. Now, this is not a tightly held secret. There are entire categories of activity, fake news making, unethical marketing, poker machines, that carefully design themselves to exploit these human weaknesses and make a pretty astounding profit doing it. This has serious implications for us individually, but it's also relevant to what a post-pandemic world could look like. For about 20 years, I've worked on the design of what are sometimes called socio-technical systems. So these are the big systems of society, like the health system or the tax system, where people and rules and norms and technologies all come together in a complex web that pops out important things like hospitals and tax audits and tram routes, school curricula, airport screening points, the things that make our society work. These big systems are often at their most interesting where they're not working well, where they're broken. And this is because at the weak spots, they can reveal the difference between how we think the world works and how it actually works. Which is more dangerous, sharks or chairs? Now, just hold that question in your head for a few minutes. We'll come back to it. So we suck at prediction. But in some types of prediction, we rarely suck. And one place where we rarely suck is when we're faced with the possibility of novelty, things that we haven't experienced before. Behavioral scientists will often talk about two cognitive flaws that humans suffer from, present bias and the availability heuristic. So present bias is a trait we have where we put too much emphasis on what's right in front of us and too little emphasis on what's down the track, even when what's down the track is really wonderful or really nasty. If you've ever looked at the possessions that you've accumulated over the course of your life, performed a quick mental calculation, and then set your contents insurance at $25,000 so that you can still afford that trip to Hawaii. If you've ever smoked a cigarette with a cancer warning on the front of the cigarette box, congratulations, you now have lived experience of present bias. The second cognitive flaw is called the availability heuristic. So remember the question about chairs and sharks. No one in this room right now is thinking that sharks are more dangerous, just because they know that my asking the question is too damn suspicious. But I think you also know deep down inside that flicker of dread you feel when you're treading water in the ocean on a cloudy day and momentarily flash back to the scene from Jaws, you know the one. We just don't feel that way about chairs. And yet, about a decade ago, a study by the Bureau of Statistics found that falls from chairs was implicated in 26 deaths in Australia in 2009, against an average of less than 2 deaths a year from sharks. This is the availability heuristic in action. So heuristics are little mental shortcuts our brains perform. Ultimately, our brains are pretty lazy. So when they're assessing how likely something is to happen, it checks if there are any easily accessible, vivid memories about the event. If it finds some juicy memories, it assumes that the probability of something similar happening is high. If it doesn't, then it assumes the probability is low. This is absolutely common, and of course, it's absolutely disconnected from reality. If I say the words shark attack, your mind will flash to all the movies, news articles, and footage of shark attacks that you've seen. Unless you're across the data, your brain will fall prey to the availability heuristic, and you'll think that shark attacks are everywhere. But fatal chair accidents? Well, chair accidents aren't reported by the news. They don't appear in movies, so we discount the risk. Few of us have likely lived experience of a serious accident falling off the chair. And yet fatal chair accidents are 13 times more likely than shark attacks, which brings us to COVID-19. The current pandemic is a tragedy, and it's unfolding in ways we're not expecting. It's revealing some of the human flaws in our socio-technical systems. This is a dark time in global history. But the tragedy is not the whole story, because there's also something pretty wonderful happening as well. The wild goats are back in Llandudno in Wales. They're roaming empty streets and they're sleeping on the hedges of outraged residents. In Brazil, nearly 97 critically endangered hawksbill sea turtles hatched on a beach near the town of Paulista and quietly made their way down the deserted beach unimpeded to the sea. New cases of sexually transmitted disease have plummeted thanks to social isolation. We've seen 52% less gonorrhea and 34% less chlamydia in April, and that's just in the ACT. which is part of a national trend. So well done, everybody. Air travel has all but stopped. Our propensity to jump on a plane for a quick meeting in another city it's kind of been paused, and instead people are video conferencing in from our home office, the dining room table. This pattern has, by data-driven estimates, more than halved air travel-related CO2 emissions in Australia. And a study by Nature observed that global emissions from ground travel during global confinement had by April dropped 36%. Around the world, cycling is taking off, with bicycle sales surging as people look for solitary and local ways of getting exercise and essentials transport. With dramatic scenes from the Ruby Princess and other cruise ships around the world fresh in our minds, we've also seen a dramatic decrease in cruise ship leisure travel. So cruise ship travel is a major source of CO2, and the carbon footprint reduction will be quantitatively mind-boggling. And these are just the big things. People are focusing on local. We're growing food in our backyard, rediscovering our neighborhoods. We're thinking about the attractiveness of disposability and maybe finding that not as attractive. And we're challenging a lot of assumptions that have been with us for a long time to our collective detriment. All of this is amazing in the context of climate change. It's beyond amazing because we are doing something here that should have taken a decade or decades to achieve. At the levels of government, industry, and the community, we all suffer from present bias and the availability heuristic. We don't want to change things. The status quo, the short-term benefits of medium-term thinking, our psychology just isn't geared towards committed action against them. We've never experienced climate change, or well, maybe we're starting to with the Australian bushfires, and maybe we've started to build some vivid memories that can make our availability bias work for society rather than against it. But I think my great fear is, and it should be our great fear, that we don't sustain the progress that we're seeing right now after the pandemic is under control. I want to circle back to the availability bias for a moment and talk about agriculture consultants in the Midwest of the US. So the Midwest is an incredible farming land. The weather, soil, people, they all come together. They create one of the most intense agricultural regions in the world. And in 2015, there was an interesting study done which focused on agriculture consultants. So they found that within this cohort, there is quite significant skepticism around climate change, and particularly anthropogenic climate change. So that's climate change caused by humans. But the study found something quite amazing. Attitudes in Midwestern agricultural consultants changed when they began to experience unusual weather patterns. So weather variability undid the skepticism, and there was an increase in the belief in anthropogenic climate change. This is a critical shift because the consultants are a major leverage point in getting farms to adapt to a warmer future and mitigate CO2 emissions. This is the availability heuristic working in a climate context. Vivid experiences, easy to reach memories, creating a personal evidence base that reframes reality and changes behavior. This finding is good for Midwest farmers, but it's also good for everyone at risk of climate effects, and that's everyone. Globally, COVID has forced us to make some big changes immediately. We're getting to experience the world differently, more likely, because it's taken long-term sustainability goals and made it not just immediately beneficial, but in some cases legally mandatory. And I believe that this is hacking our present bias. We're building habits and expectations from lived experiences that we would have never tolerated in December last year because we didn't want to forego the immediate benefits of living the way we do for long-term gains. We've never experienced climate change before. But with COVID, we're getting a taste, and it's not a far stretch. Zoonotic illness, disruption of daily routine, international disruption of connectivity, scarcity of essential commodities. These are true for COVID, and they'll be true for climate change as well. We have to connect the experience of COVID to our climate future and use it as a vivid example of the type of disruption that climate change will cause in our lives and the lives of our children. And if we do, we might be able to do something that 30 years of scientists' warnings, activist pleas, and generalized anxiety hasn't managed to do. We might be able to overcome our present bias and change the habits of a civilization. We might be able to use the availability heuristic to hack our psychology for global good. The pandemic has given us not just a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, not just a once-in-a-generation opportunity. not just a once-in-a-century opportunity, but one single opportunity to alter the course of the greatest threat to humanity in the current day, and maybe the greatest threat to humanity that humanity has ever faced, by hacking our present bias with our availability bias. And I think we can do it. It's going to need a lot of conversation. It's going to need people to actively make that connection. And I hope that you can all be a part of that conversation. Thank you.